We've got a very busy news. There is a lot of very emotive issues. So stay with us. Principally, we recognise the suffering of a great many people in the Middle East, and we're going to try and come into this in an even-handed way. David, you've got an initial report over hostages and Gaza.
Yeah, so this is an update from Indian Express, which is pretty factual in these matters. So it's reporting Israel-Hamas War, Day 10. 199 hostages have been held in Gaza, says Israel military. It also reports that media reports have stated that United Nations shelters in Gaza have run out of water amid the Israeli blockade. Israel has denied reports that a ceasefire has been agreed, unfortunately, to allow for foreigners to move out of the besieged Gaza enclave and for entry of aid. Hospitals in Gaza Strip are set to run out of fuel in the next 24 hours, warned the UN's Humanitarian Office, days after Israel cut off fuel, water, and food and electricity to the neighbourhood in retaliation for the Hamas attack last week. At least 4,000 people, 2,600 Palestinians and 1,400 Israelis have been killed and 10,000 injured in the ongoing war. So that's where we are today. No movement to start any ground offensive yet, but obviously that's expected quite soon.
Okay, David, thank you for that. Well, I chose Forbes for an initial headline, and here we've got it: Israel-Hamas conflict, the grim statistics after a week of war. And if we just put in some of their figures, it's saying more than 400,000 is the number of displaced people in Gaza, so immense suffering there. Nearly 12,000 for the number of wounded on both sides. Death toll 3,500. Where they were saying Israel 1,300 and Gaza accounting for at least 2,215, and 800 the rough number of people who've left Gaza, which is obviously extremely small, and 150 the estimated number of hostages. So there is some difference between the figures, but the Gaza Health Ministry put out that figure of 2,750 Palestinians killed and 9,700 wounded in Israeli strikes on Gaza since October the 7th. And just to echo David's point, this was the BBC an hour or so ago. Israel and Hamas deny Gaza ceasefire. And I think we have to label that a very sad reality. Now, let's move into some more of the detail, and I'll pass back to you, David.
Well, over the weekend, there's been a lot of demonstrations with a lot of people taking to the streets. So we see here Euronews reporting there have been marches both in favour of Israel and in favour of the Palestinians in many European cities. Generally speaking, the large crowds have been out in favour of the Palestinian cause. They report here that demonstrations passed off peacefully. London police has threatened anyone that was openly supporting Hamas would be arrested. The Hamas obviously is a certified terrorist organisation in the UK. While a Frankfurt court cited security concerns in an order prohibiting a pro-Palestinian march. So generally, it's been peaceful, which is very good. There's been a few scuffles and a little bit of trouble, but not very much, which is all to the good. What's missing, of course, is the marching for peace, right? Because these are marches for a side in the conflict. They're marches for they're very partisan. Anyone who turns up with the wrong colour flag stands a chance of being roughed up. They're not marching to call for an end to conflict and for actual peace. So that's the sad reality. So what we're seeing is the split, the division reflected across the world, across Europe, not just in the Middle East.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think we've got a video.
Well, just wanted to mention, David, I mean, if we're looking at what was going on in London, I thought it was quite stark, the difference in numbers between those. I take your point about the partisan nature of the two demonstrations, but the Palestinian or the people coming out to say that the problem with the Palestinians had to end, that crowd was significantly bigger than the pro-Israeli rally, and the sort of numbers we were seeing there were similar to lockdown protest, actually?
I mean, there was certainly into the hundreds of thousands, or over 100,000, I think, in London was the sort of figure I saw. And the pro-Palestinian marches were very much larger. And of course, this is playing into essentially British and European and Western politics, where the Palestinian cause has been a darling of the left. It has been viewed as an example of the oppressed versus the oppressor, and this has been playing in politics in the UK and across Europe and across America for many years. So this has untapped all of that pent-up political activism, and we're seeing that on the streets.
Okay, so where does that take us?
Well, it takes us to back to Israel, to what's actually happening on the ground. And one of the things which is different this time, there are many things different about this conflict. If you look at 1973, there was very little international involvement, almost none. Britain had a complete arms embargo, for example. This is not the same now. We're seeing much more deployment of international troops, British and American, particularly American troops, to Israel or to the area around Israel. So here we've got an Israeli pastor, a Christian pastor of Jewish extraction. So his mindset is very sympathetic towards the Jewish people, but he's probably faced quite a bit of persecution from Jewish authorities or influence within the country, because being a Christian pastor in Israel is not an easy number. And as a Christian, he's got a reasonably neutral view of things. So he's reporting on what he sees from his base in the Galilee. The small extract I've got here is he's talking about the American deployment to Israel.
They were also very surprised to see U.S. military support. When I say military support, may I tell you, there are U.S. troops on the ground here. There's U.S. troops here, there's U.S. Special Forces, there's U.S. airplanes, there's U.S. ammunition, there's U.S. naval vessels. The United States military is in its full presence here. And that one, Hezbollah and Iran did not see coming.
So just to back up that point, and this is the point that Mike was making on Friday as well, here we see a tweet from US Central Command detailing the 354th Fighter Squadron. The A-10 Thunderbolts have arrived in the region, and this is supporting other A-10s from the 75th Fighter Squadron who are already there. And we have Air and Space Forces magazine reporting on F-15s landing in the Middle East. These come from RAF Lakenheath, and they are the 494th Expeditionary Fighter Squadron. So they are also in theatre. And as we have been reporting last week, there's a major naval presence from the United States as well. So here we see the USS Eisenhower. This is the second carrier strike group, is now headed to Israel. Quoting United States Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, this has been done to deter any state or non-state actor seeking to escalate this war. So this is from the Jewish News Syndicate here. They report the strike group includes the guided missile cruiser USS Philippine Sea, guided missile destroyers USS Gravely and USS Mason, and the carrier Air Wing 3 with 9 aircraft squadrons, all associated support staff. So this is part of the efforts to deter hostile actions against Israel, or any efforts towards widening this war following the Hamas attack on Israel. So what we must take from that is this is an implied threat to Hezbollah, to Syria, to any surrounding nation, that if they're going to escalate, if they're going to get involved in this war, presumably they're going to be dealing with the United States Air Force as well.
Keep going.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
Go ahead, David.
Well, I mean, I paused to see if you wanted to add anything there. The point I'm making is that this is entirely new. Generally, when there's been trouble in the Middle East before 1967, 1973, etc., there's been usually a bit of an arms embargo. There's been very great reluctance on powers to get involved. Usually, eventually, America has moved and made some supplies to the Israelis. 1973, the Israelis were attacked. They was certainly the victim of an attack, and they had mostly British armour. The Centurion tank being the finest battle tank of its age. Britain wouldn't even supply spare parts. Such was the refusal to supply any weapons or to do anything that might escalate or continue the war. This is entirely different this time. So we see the major powers quite happily getting involved and deploying very significant forces to the theatre, and at the very least, rattling sabres very loudly. The next point I want to make is that within Israel, the response to the horrific events of just over a week ago, and all of the funerals that are going through the country, and all of the testimonies of first responders and medics and soldiers that are flooding the country, has been a lot of rage, which is very dangerous, and also a hardening of even the moderates. So this next video clip is Yossi Beilin, who was former justice minister in the Israeli government. He was very much a dove. He was a person who supported the two-state solution, who wanted to negotiate with the Palestinians. He was a moderate in Israeli political terms. We have here a little video of where he stands on the conflict with Hamas.
I never had hopes to have peace with Hamas, ever. You will never you can never quote me about a hope to have peace with Hamas. I mean, these guys, for example, would never talk to somebody like me. For them, I am a symbol of the two-state solution. And this is, for them, a curse. It is not that they are Palestinians and, we have to talk, they are our neighbors, we have to talk to them, we have to have peace with them, which is the case with the PLO. I mean, if you don't replace them, it will be ongoing hell, and we cannot afford it anymore. Really, we cannot afford it. But it will, if they are not there, in my view, it will enhance the chance to have peace in the region.
So what we're seeing here is a very substantial hardening of opinion within Israel. And even the moderates, even the doves, are determined that Hamas must be eliminated from Gaza. Right? Now, this then brings us to the question of how is that achieved, and how is that achieved without massive loss of innocent civilian life, or even military life? And this is where this next point I want to make here is the Washington Post is reporting. Israeli ground offensive in Gaza could be a bloodbath, analysts say. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. Sorry, I've skipped ahead. I'm sorry, Brian.
That's fine. There's a lot to cover, David, and we've all got a lot of thoughts in our heads today as we deliver this news. But I wanted to bring this in because I thought it was an incredible statement, but also the image. As I've looked across certainly UK media, I'm not seeing a lot of pictures of the scale of the attacks going into Gaza. We're seeing pictures of destroyed buildings, but we're not seeing the sheer horror of these very heavy bombing raids coming in. So this picture caught my attention, but then I was very interested in what the real story was. And we had this delightful young lady, the Israeli ambassador, and she was defending Israel's military bombardment of Gaza. Now, I've just taken a couple of statements because I think there's some very interesting things here. She said that Hamas terrorists launched their attacks with no forewarning and slaughtered innocent, unarmed Israeli citizens. She goes on to say that Gaza is not Israel's responsibility. We don't have any obligation to bring Gaza water. And then she's saying that 1,300 Israelis were targeted, slaughtered. They didn't get 24 hours to flee or protect themselves. And I look at the face of this young woman and I think to myself, my goodness, is your heart so hard you have no compassion for people on either side who are now being slaughtered? So it was the look of the face. Is she a mother? Maybe she is or not, I don't know. But what a hard heart. And if I follow it up, then we get a lesson, because she said this: 600,000 Germans were killed in your attacks on Hamburg and Dresden. Why? Because you knew this was the only way you could defeat the Nazis. So now we're in this world where everybody is going to throw at each other the horrors that have taken place in previous wars. But we could have a long debate about whether it was correct to do what we actually did with Hamburg and Dresden. But here we see horrors committed by the British on the German civilian population are now dragged up to help justify brutality in Gaza. And I found this whole article particularly sad and really quite unpleasant. Okay, it's back to you, David, here, because you got some comments, I think, on risks.
Yeah, so this is, sorry, I started this too early. This takes us to, there is a decision within Israeli society, which you saw there with the ambassador as well, that something has to be done in Gaza, and there's not going to be too much worry about the collateral damage. Albeit, to be fair, there is warnings and evacuation orders, and warnings are being given, albeit under very difficult circumstances, because you're talking about trying to move 1 million people in a few days. So the plan, we assume, is some sort of ground attack into Gaza. Now, what the Washington Post is alerting us to here is that is by no means going to be an easy process. So they're talking about it could be a bloodbath. The report, Israeli soldiers preparing for a ground offensive face a hellish thicket of tightly packed buildings, mines, and tunnels while hunting Hamas militants who blend in amongst civilians, a precarious situation that could cause immense human suffering and draw other countries into the war, said US officials. Quote, I think they're going back in heavy, and it's going to be a bloodbath for everybody, said Frank McKenzie Jr., retired Marine Corps general who served as the US Chief of Central Command until last year. He predicted that the violence would be dragged out over a much longer period of time than the Hamas attack, with the Israelis getting bogged down in messy unpredictability of urban warfare. And this is a point that is being, I think, missed in the desire for revenge, that revenge does not come without huge cost to both sides. This is the sort of prospect that's ahead, and I don't think that American general's wrong to talk about weeks or months, a much longer process, and the potential for a bloodbath is absolutely there.
Okay, thank you for that. We've also got other warnings here: death to Israel.
Now, yes, so this comes down to one of the questions. There are many, many questions about this. One of the questions that we're trying to grapple with is what happened to the IDF, what happened to the Shin Bet security service. Why was this not? There was no warning. There was no warning to civilians. There was no preparation from the military. The military were caught completely unawares by the attack last week. Now, a lot of people have said that they find that unbelievable, incredible. How could this happen? It's to somewhat add to those questions. We have here an opinion piece from, again, the Jewish News Syndicate, dated the 13th of April this year. Okay, and as Mordecai Kedar reports, he said, I hesitate quite a bit whether to publish this piece because it might cause panic. However, the Middle East environment, particularly Iraq, these things are known and serve as a topic of open discussion. So it's unthinkable that the Israeli public should not be aware of them as well. And he goes on to say, a source I've known for years, an expatriate from the Middle East, a supporter of Israel who lives in Europe and is in continuous contact with people in Iran and Iraq, conveyed to me their assessment that Iran plans to launch a combined attack on Israel in the foreseeable future that will include all the forces at its disposal in several Arab countries. He then goes on to describe what his interpretation of that attack might look like. And it's very similar to what actually happened. He's talking about missiles, unmanned aerial vehicles, a shower of missiles, and as the opening salvo. Now, some things he doesn't get right. Some things he's talking about forces from Syria and Lebanon and Gaza. Well, it was only Gaza, essentially. But he did talk about the taking of hostages, and he talked about, amongst other things, the first phase being an aerial one, and then a coordinated ground attack with infantry forces mounted on dirt bikes and all-terrain vehicles to attack Israeli ground forces and reach the Jewish settlements as quickly as possible, which is exactly what happened. So the fact that that's in the public domain in April certainly raises even more questions about what happened to the Israeli security forces and Israeli intelligence system, that they didn't predict something like this if it was what would appear to be reported here, quite common conversation amongst anti-Israel groups in the surrounding countries.
Okay, well, I just wanted to mention this article to kick off a little bit of discussion about this. So this is from the Times of Israel saying, Iran threatens no one can guarantee control of the situation if Israel enters Gaza. Tehran condemns barbaric attacks in Gaza with civilian prisoners in Gaza as a priority. The US fears Iran could become directly engaged, says the White House. And of course, this is presenting this all as a threat. Now, the first paragraph of this says that the Iranian foreign minister held talks with the Qatari emir on Sunday. That was yesterday. So I just wanted to make the point about what the Iranian foreign minister actually said. And thanks to Vanessa for pushing this in my direction. So first of all, he was talking about a prior meeting in Lebanon where he was speaking to the Secretary General of Hezbollah, Mr. Nasrallah, and that they were talking about all the potential scenarios. They were all on the table for discussion. He said that we hope that political efforts will prevent the war from expanding. Otherwise, no one knows what will happen in the next hour. Iran cannot remain in a spectator in this situation, however, is what he was saying. And that if America and Israel do not stop the current policy, the scope for the war cannot be stopped. If the scope of the war expands, heavy losses will befall America as well. And he said that the continued aggression and the absence of a political solution add fuel to the fire, and things may get out of control. So I'm afraid I can't even come close to agreeing with the Times of Israel that this was threats from Iran at all. This was a rational look at what the potentialities are, it seems to me, and really several calls there for there to be a political solution to this.
Absolutely. Well, I'm just going to bring up an email on screen that came into the UK column. This is from Priscilla. And what is she saying? Well, she's saying, is there some way to stop the horrendous warmongering? Now, no sides are mentioned in her email, and I think this is very significant. She's saying who can organise a peace protest, but as David has already pointed out, that if the peace protests are partisan in nature, it doesn't really take us forward. So she is saying, what can we do about this? And of course, the main objective for people is to get the violence and the fighting stopped and to start the peace process and to get the negotiations going. And that is not going to happen by one side or the other being completely partisan in its desires. Now, I wanted to bring this one up on screen. It's come in from Gaza. We know that families have been devastated in Israel as well, but I'm just taking it for its human interest side. So it's been sent to us from Patricia, and she's had an email from a friend who lives in Gaza City. And the email says very quickly, Gaza is destroyed. I don't know why they keep bombing, because what's even left last night, minute on minute on minute, non-stop barrage of bombing. It hasn't stopped today either. Fuel is nearly out from private generators. Food, bits and bobs, the bakery might be open, then it's shut. The small shop might open, but then it's shut. It's all a bit of a mishmash. Most stores are shut, to be honest. Then she's talking about a lady asking about food, but we haven't been able to get vegetables. People are helping each other's out, charging phones, helping with food. So everyone is surviving. We'll soon be isolated with no electricity when the last drop of fuel ends. The Israeli occupation circulates nonsense, but all I know is that we have to remain strong, trust in Allah, God, and have faith we will get through this. If not for us, then for the children. And I thought that was a very poignant email, which should help us all focus that at the end of the day, of course, is the children who are suffering across the board in this region. Mark, let's